Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Muhammad.
My name is Amir.
My name is Sim.
Today we have a special guest and a good friend of ours, Dr. Kamran Riaz. Dr. Kamran Riaz has a uniquely indigenous background in Islamic Studies. Before high school, he completed memorization of the Qur'an at the Islamic Institute in Illinois. He graduated from University of Illinois in Chicago with degrees in both economics and Middle Eastern history. He studies and teaches classes at Darul Qasim, an institute for classical Islamic knowledge in Illinois, and also leads taraweeh prayers and conducts classes at the Downtown Islamic Center. He attended UIC College of Medicine and completed his ophthalmology training at Northwestern University and University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas. Currently, he works and resides in the western suburbs of Chicago with his wife and daughter. Dr. Kamran Riaz, welcome. Jazakallah khair for being here.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be part of this wonderful podcast.
Jazakallah
Thank you for coming.
You've done so much at such a young age. I mean, how did this all start?
First of all, I think as it's mentioned in the Qur'an, وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ, right? So whatever small accomplishments that I've been able to do, it's really solely by the will and the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But number two, I think a lot of credit has to go to my mother, who at a very young age instilled within me and my brother this idea that we have to kind of try our very best, both Islamically and secularly. And so she wasn't satisfied with us just trying to do well in school and getting an A and, on a report card in secular school, but she was the same amount of kind of importance was given to Sunday school through, reading Qur'an, studying Qur'an, that type of thing. And so from a very young age, my mom, I think, was very instrumental. And she would tell us that, she grew up in India. And in India and many parts of the Muslim world, unfortunately, the idea that's put into the minds of young kids is that if someone is smart, they show some talent and potential, they try to tell them, go become a doctor, go become an engineer, go become something big secularly. And there's not too much emphasis that's put on what this person can accomplish religiously. And then, unfortunately, and this is a modern phenomenon because classically that never happened, right? But modern times, if somebody doesn't show academic potential, they're like, oh, you know what, we'll send him to the madrasa and maybe he'll become a hafiz and he'll have some type of livelihood. And the irony of that, of course, was that in classical Muslim societies, the most brilliant people, the most academically, the people who had the most academic potential would be sent to the madrasas. Not only would they become, hufad and ulama and, memorize the Qur'an, become scholars, but then they would go out and branch in 1, 2, or 3 sciences of the secular sciences as well, and kind of bring and fuse those together. So I'm very appreciative that, my mom in particular instilled that within me at a very young age. And I think that's kind of been my motivation, that I want to try to do something, both religiously as well as secularly. And, alhamdulillah, through the grace and fadl of Allah, some small accomplishments have been done. You
got into med school and you're studying at the same time. I mean, studying your Islamic studies at the same time, right?
Yeah. I've always, from a very young age, I've been studying with many of the scholars and, in and around Chicago. When I got into medical school, of course, every Desi parent's dream. The nice thing about, I was part of, the guaranteed med program over at UIC, okay, right? And we should give a shout out to UIC for shutting down the Trump rally on Friday, right? Yeah. I always felt like driving down there and just being part of it. But no, alhamdulillah, because I was sort of in the quote unquote guaranteed program, I didn't have a pressure to get into medical school. And so through undergrad, I was able to kind of, in addition to studying economics and history, was able to kind of connect myself with some of the scholars in Chicago and start my studies, more intensively side by side with undergrad. And that continued, through medical school, the residency, and, still continues now. And I think primarily I'm a student of the sacred sciences. I barely cut it as a student, so I by no means am I a scholar or anything like that. But I think I've been blessed and privileged that throughout my life I've had an opportunity to be involved in studying both the secular sciences as well as the religious sciences.
You teach at Darul Qasim right now, right?
I'd like to think I primarily study at Darul Qasim. I think I learn more than I actually teach, but I do teach some classes there, but primarily I study there and try to take advantage of all the resources there that are at Darul Qasim.
What's your main focus? What's your area of interest?
Right now, I'm studying the traditional scholar program, which is the Alim program, and so it's a very as they call a decompressed course of study that I'm doing, so which has taken several years. Alhamdulillah, it's still many years away, but I'm trying to study the same sciences that people like Sheikh Amir have studied, and try to incorporate and synthesize that with my medical background in order to try to be involved with certain topics that would require some knowledge of both the religious sciences as well as the secular sciences. One example that I can talk about is a translation project that Sheikh Amin, the director of Darul Qasim, asked me to do, which is a translation of a treatise written by Imam al-Ghazali called Fi Hikmati Khalq al-Insan. It's titled Concerning Divine Wisdom in the Creation of Man. And it's a treatise that Ghazali wrote at the end of his life. And when we think of Ghazali, we think, he's a theologian, he's a jurist, he's a philosopher, he's a, mystic and all of these things. But towards the end of his life, he began to really write down a lot of his interests and, in different subjects and sciences. So here in this treatise, what's fascinating about this is it's a head-to-toe anatomical survey of the human body, right? He talks about the eyes, the nose, the ears, every single part of the human body. And he tries to say, what is the hikmah? What is the divine wisdom in that body part being created in that particular shape, being placed in that part of the body? What are the wisdoms behind it? And what usefulness will that body part have in the hereafter as well? And that's his motivation for studying this. Now, what's interesting about this is that this isn't some ivory tower discussion. He's not sitting in a madrasa someplace and writing this. The amount of scientific detail and precision that he has, like he counts the number of bones in the body, he counts the number of muscles in the body, clearly suggests that he must have either read some of the leading anatomy textbooks of the day or consulted with physicians and anatomists of his time to have that level of detail. So when this project was given to me, I was able to, translate, Ghazali, which is no, easy task, as Sheikh Amr would probably be able to appreciate. But using my medical background, was able to kind of then show where does Ghazali get it right scientifically,
right?
Because in many places he gets it right. There's a few places where he kind of gets it wrong in terms of, he still subscribed to like Galen's theory of the humors of the body and stuff, but that was the leading, theory of the human body at the time. But nonetheless, there are some fascinating things that he is able to describe. Like he actually discusses pulmonary circulation in the human body much before William Harvey, who's often given credit in the secular textbooks of discovering it. And then we at our MSA IAWs often talk about the Syrian physician Ibn Nafis. But Ghazali was much before him, and he talks about pulmonary circulation, that blood from the heart goes into the lungs, it becomes aerated there, it comes back into the heart, and then goes to the rest of the human body. So I think that's a nice example of a project where I was able to use my two different backgrounds, and so then I wrote a commentary on it showing where from the modern medical textbooks that are used in medical schools today, kind of using that as a footnotes to show where was he correct, where was he perhaps slightly off. And so, that's a project actually right now. It's with the publisher. So make dua, inshallah, that it gets published, because I think it'll be a fascinating resource for the Muslim medical professional, as well as the Muslim scholar and the students of knowledge who are fans of Ghazali, to sort of see perhaps a different side of what Ghazali talks about.
No, mashallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you tawfiq and increase you in the barakah in this project, because it's an amazing project. And there's a few things that we can gather just from what you just mentioned. Is number one, the believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter what profession he's in, he's always going to find a type of ethics that's in Islam that he can relate to his respected profession. It's, what you're talking about right now, and I think Sheikh Amin is the only person that actually talks about this from traditional scholarship in such a brave way, is Islamic bioethics, right? Or biomedical ethics. And somebody who is a physician, he can be a student of knowledge right from the get-go if he is looking to the same type of project that you're doing. I mean, the possibilities are endless when it comes to this. And the other thing is that many times in the Sharia, the final mufti on something is the profession, like a doctor, right? He is the last person that the alim actually has to resort to and say, you know what, we have to consult a physician, or you have to consult a physician to find out if this is halal or haram. So the thing that Dr. Kamran is doing is something amazing, is he won't have to refer to a physician anymore when it comes to many. It's basically 2 in 1. There's many times where there's many things I have no idea of, and I have to refer to a doctor. I have to refer to a surgeon, a plastic surgeon sometimes. But that is completely 2 in 1 now. So anyone who's actually in the medical field, they should never think, oh, I want to do something in Islam and now my life is over. No, this is a prime example, and we should all be following this example, inshallah. I think we have to look at it in that way.
What amazes me is the fact that we have scholarship coming in this country that is not, it's very organic in terms of what we've seen in the past in the Indian Pakistani world and in the Arab world, where it was people who only failed at being a doctor or being an engineer or any respectable profession. Only those dropouts would be ending up going to Islamic universities. And then you would hear some crazy opinions coming out of those countries from very few select scholars. I'm not going to mention anyone's name, but you would hear some silly opinions, for example, that the world is flat. Now, we all know that the world is not flat. It's an observable reality. It's a fact, 100%.
Universally understood fact.
Yeah. But you had those type of rare opinions that you'd see every once in a while, and you would find other people who wanted to poke fun at Islam. They would use these arguments and say, hey, look, these guys are nuts.
Yeah.
So this is what religion does to you.
And that's what Orientalism actually fed off of many of those types of opinions.
Right.
Right. But yeah. And I think that in every respected profession, no matter what profession you're in, Islam always has something to save you, and you can also be a student of knowledge through your profession. Yeah,
and I think I think that's kind of what's needed now in the American Muslim community more than ever, is to be able to have people who are professionals in various fields, whether it's medicine, law, engineering, finance, who can then have a conversation with the ulama, with the scholars, and be able to now synthesize new approaches to issues that need to be addressed. Because the problem that was happening, at least in the past 20, 30 years, was if you have an issue like organ transplantation, for example, the opinions that were coming out were either just by a physician who was a Muslim, well-meaning, well-intentioned, but had no idea what the tradition said about any of those issues. Or you had a sheikh, again, very well-intentioned, who would speak from the traditional platform about here's what the deen says, but had no idea about what are the developments, the implications in modern medicine. And what's exciting now at a place like Darul Qasim is now, at least for the first time in my knowledge in Muslim America, is we can have a place where professionals who are experts in their field, Muslim professionals in their field, and even non-Muslim professionals, can sit with Muslim scholars and now actually have a conversation and try to come up with ideas and solutions, to real problems. Things like Muslim finance, things like, what are the economic implications of debt? The tradition has much to say about it, but can we sit down with an economist, for example, and try to see what can Islam offer in a field like that? So that's why I'm very excited, about Darul Qasim that I'm a part of, is because it's providing a platform for those conversations to take place. There's so many conversations that need to happen between the professional and the scholar, and hopefully we can kind of keep that momentum going.
And I think you're scratching the surface with that, with everybody. Everyone's realizing, because of the initiative that you're a part of, that it's actually taking place. And that brings me to my next point. Sometimes I feel that Sheikh Amin, who I think everybody should just research, this amazing individual and Sheikh, he's a very big inspiration for me. Before I even went to study, I actually consulted him, and he kind of just gave me like a few questions. He would ask me a few questions to see if I was actually. I saw it as, he was testing me to see if I was serious or not. But one thing I will say is that he is a gem, and a lot of people don't realize how. And I'm choosing my words very carefully, how colossal he is when it comes to usul and usul al-fiqh. People don't realize because he doesn't have that discourse in public. He knows when to have that discourse, right? So people should really understand, at least if you want to understand and scratch the surface of usul al-fiqh, visit this amazing sheikh, and he's in Glen Ellen. He's not too far from any of us who are living in the Chicagoland area. The second thing is... And
just for people who don't know him, what's his last name?
Sheikh Amin Khulwadia. Right. And his details, I'm going to ask Dr. Kamran, inshallah. But the other thing is that
the one point I wanted to add, Sheikh Amr, sorry to cut you off.
No,
but
it's all you.
I think we're in a very interesting time in American Islam where, we've seen amongst young people an interest in deen. People want to go to lectures, they want to go to halaqat. But in the past 10 years, it's almost like we've shifted now to this, what I like to call this deen-tertainment. Where people want to go to lectures because they want to be amused, they want to be entertained, and if they learn some Islamic knowledge, that's well and good. But the primary focus is towards that, and so therefore, the people who are charismatic, who are personable, who can market themselves really well, are the ones whom everybody knows about. And, we respect their work. And again, I don't want to bash on anyone's work because we're at a time now where as long as people are calling the La ilaha illallah, it's cool. You're on my team.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think somewhat the tragedy in that is that many people then, when they sit down or when real scholars, people who are just giants in their field, come to a place or a town or in the town, there's kind of like, oh, he's not going to entertain me. Yeah. He's going to be kind of boring. And so people don't take advantage of that. I see the same thing in the world of medicine as well. I mean, you look at who do the masses kind of respect as like the number one doctor? It's like Dr. Oz, and the guy's like a total quack. Yeah. The stuff he says, but he's really entertaining. He's charming. He's charismatic. So people, respect Dr. Oz and these Dr. Phil types as like, the prophets, in medicine or whatever it might be. But, when you have, the Surgeon General or somebody else kind of talking about something, because that person may not be entertaining or charismatic, it's kind of like, I'm going to listen to Dr. Oz. And so that's what I really feel is that I think, the charismatic, the wa'id, the preachers and the scholars we have, they're wonderful. I think they really are involved in kind of getting people back to deen and things like that. And that's a necessary role. But I do encourage people to also take advantage of some of our scholars who are very academic oriented, who may not be very charismatic, but have a much deeper understanding of deen than many of the charismatic people will do. And those people who are charismatic will say the same thing too.
Exactly.
And so that's where I think that we have to take advantage of all the resources we have.
We're such an entertainment-centric society where if we're not being entertained, we don't want to spend our time towards it. And I feel like it's plaguing everything. It's not just Islam or furthering our education within our deen, but it's a problem that's plaguing every aspect of society, that if it's not entertaining me, I'm losing interest and I'm moving on to something else. People are quitting their jobs. And
it's the concept of being an entertainment junkie, right?
Yeah.
You have to have it, and if something's not entertaining you, that drug of entertainment is not enough, so I have to jump to something else, which causes all types of chaos and confusion. And that's for sure. And a lot of times, as you're mentioning, many of the shuyukh that are high level, elite level shuyukh, they may not appeal, like you said, to the masses. And I think it's kind of always, kind of been that way, that the general populace of people, they need that type of thing that hooks them into the deen that's kind of entertaining, right? Especially in our times, as you're mentioning, entertainment. But those individuals that are elites, they're always going to only appeal to the students of knowledge, and students of knowledge know how valuable they are. There's some things that Sheikh Amin, that he would mention when I was younger, because I've known him for a long time, and they're making sense to me now. And I was like, I remember him mentioning that in the khutbah, and I'm wondering how many people actually got that. So that's one thing about it. I think he's, mashallah, as far as in fiqh, as far as a judge is concerned, a qadi is concerned, he can be a qadi in his own right, for sure, which is one of the highest levels of fiqh, But one of the main things that I was just wanted to ask you a simple question is, number one, how is it working so closely with him? Number two is, did he intentionally bring all of these professionals into his school, which is an awesome idea? Because all the people I know that go there are highly educated individuals, and he makes all of them kind of like his personal students. So is that by design, or did it just end up happening and it just flourished that way? You know?
Yeah, I mean, to answer the first question, I think it's one of the greatest gifts that Allah has given me is that I've been able to have this, this connection, this ta'alluq with him. And I often joke to people that him and my mom are the only two reasons I'm still in Chicago, because I would have left because of this cold weather and things like that a long time ago, because it's not like
definitely not our sports teams.
The Bulls and the Bears aren't winning a championship anytime soon. But the answer to the second question, I think part of it is by design, but part of it is also, I think, that people kind of gravitate towards that. Many of the professionals who've come in, I've known Sheikh Amin now for about 15 years, alhamdulillah. What I've seen is many of the other high-level professionals who've come in, even some of the young scholars who I will also consider high-level, people in the religious sciences that have come in, have kind of come in very organically, in the sense that they've been led there, or they just have heard about it. They may have heard, him give a talk, or they may have heard, me someplace, or whatever it might be, that they're looking for something where they can collaborate on these issues, and I think that's kind of what's happening right now, is that this is a place where we want to have those professionals and the scholars kind of collaborate, because this was the model that classical Muslim societies had, is that they provided these forums where people could sit and discuss. I mean, one of the strengths of the Hanafi school, and I'm not trying to promote the Hanafi school here, but one of the strengths of the Hanafi school was that Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, had 40 scholars around him that could sit and discuss and debate, and each one had their own area of expertise in the secular sciences. Of course, Abu Hanifa was a giant in the field of finance and economics and business and things like that. But having that discussion, that back and forth, leads to, a better exchange of ideas. And it's not just one person's opinion, or, this is the only way that it can be done. And so this is what, we hope, that Darul Qasim can provide a platform for. Hopefully it can spread to other parts of the country where people have something similar in their respective communities. But that's what we feel, at least I feel, is sort of the way forward in some of these challenging times we have.
And Darul Qasim is even working. I think next year is going to be the first year where they're going to have a full master's degree program and a PhD program, right? Eventually, yes. And that's awesome and accredited. So those individuals who, even like myself, I was talking to Sheikh Amin about that. I was like, I can't wait for this to happen, because I was thinking of traveling overseas again for a master's, but it's something very awesome.
Well, what's the basic program that they have for someone who knows Arabic and they're able to read the Qur'an and they want to improve their studies? So a lot of Indian Pakistani people in general, I guess, we all know how to read Arabic. At that level, what can they do at Darul Qasim? Is there a program for beginners over there?
Yeah, so I think, with the interest in the American Muslim community to learn, I think a lot of people feel they have to learn. But many people are confused on how to learn and what to learn. I think it's important for us to understand that basically there's two types of learning that a Muslim can do. One is what I like to call the Islahi paradigm, wherein you learn things that just make you a better person, that try to make your prayer more meaningful, or things that are just going to help you practice your deen in a better way. Right? This is the Islahi, or sort of the moral improvement paradigm, which everybody, it's that I would say is actually a fard ayn. It is obligatory in every Muslim to be involved in the Islahi paradigm to a certain degree. So to kind of extend it to the medical field, this is the knowledge that everybody has to have about how to take care of their body, how to eat right, avoiding things that are bad for your body, sleeping, exercise. Like, that's the Islahi knowledge that every single person needs to know to take care of their body. The second type of learning is the ilmi paradigm, or sort of the academic knowledge paradigm, which requires kind of a formalized, structured curriculum where you start with the absolute basics and kind of build on that in order to, reach a place where now you are a professional or a scholar in that particular field. And so that starts with some of the basic stuff, which a lot of people feel are boring, like the sarf and the nahu and things like that. That I often feel is kind of like the organic chemistry.
What are those?
Sarf and Nahu are for learning Arabic, like the conjugation of verbs and grammar and syntax, morphology, the basic sciences. And that's kind of like organic chemistry that people take in undergrad. I mean, everybody wants to be pre-med, right? If you're Desi or Arab, your parents force you to be pre-med.
But nobody wants to take that.
But everybody has to take it. And it's often called a weed out class because people who can't cut it in organic chemistry then realize I'm going to go into IT, right? Sorry, IT
I like
people.
it. I like it.
Sorry, IT people.
No, that's awesome.
But in very similar way here, Sarf and Nahu then kind of build onto other things like fiqh and usul and tafsir. And interestingly enough, the last thing that you study is hadith, right? Everybody wants to jump to hadith right now, but hadith is actually the last thing that you study. And that ilmi paradigm is that structuralized formal course of study, just like somebody who goes to medical school has to kind of go through anatomy and physiology, which are very boring, and has to go through second year of med school, third year, fourth year, until they finally become a full-fledged doctor. Why do I mention that? Is because, we have many institutions, mashallah, that are doing a wonderful job with the Islahi paradigm, all right? There's a lot of, weekend seminars, courses, halaqat, lectures, conferences. These are wonderful things for the Islahi paradigm. The problem is many people think that going to those is now the ilmi paradigm. They think that if I can exercise and know what to do about my body, then I know how to also be a doctor. But the ilmi paradigm is something that requires a lot of time, sacrifice, struggle. Sheikh Amr can speak about this because he's been through that, where you have to go through some really boring stuff. I mean, when we studied Arabic, we had to, memorize the verb conjugation tables. You can't get around. You got to go fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'ala, fa'ala.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
It's boring, right? Yeah. It's really boring to go through, but it's like, everybody now, when they want to play basketball, they want to do the Steph Curry fadeaway 30-foot jump shot, or they want to dunk or stuff like that. But if you don't know how to dribble, you don't know how to make a simple bounce pass, then you shouldn't be trying a behind the back pass. And that's where the ilmi paradigm forces you to kind of go in a very structuralized manner, just like you have to go through a structuralized course of study in medical school in order to get to that, degree that you've earned. That's what the ilmi paradigm does. So at Darul Qasim, there's certainly courses of study that are through like the Islahi paradigm, open courses for the public, people who aren't looking to be committed, but just want something that's kind of like a iman or a vitamin boost, right, for the course of the week. And that's good. We have that. But there's also the ilmi paradigm, the Sheikh al-Hind program, the bachelor's course, the master's course, which is now a formalized course of study, which very few places in the country kind of offer something like that. So what I would encourage young people is that, not even young people, because I think what we need to have is a revolution in the sense that we need to become a community of learners. We need to realize and become humble that we know nothing. And we all need to learn. And that's what the classical Muslim communities were, is that everybody was constantly learning and trying to improve and trying to know more and more and more. And that's the same attitude and mindset that we should have. Humility and learning.
No, I think the way you broke up the two paradigms, I think that settles a lot of confusion for many people. It's a very awesome way of, explaining something. But
I want to ask you some. You say you have to go through the boring stuff, right? Mm-hmm. I know with people, my age or just, my generation, if there was a class on, let's say fiqh of love or something, right? Mm-hmm. Versus, verbs and conjugation, which one I'm picking. Mm-hmm. So what do you do? Like, how do you make verbs more interesting, or what do you do about that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the Islahi paradigm is important, right? And it's wonderful that we have these types of courses and programs. I don't know if there's a way to necessarily make the ilmi paradigm about, introduction to Arabic more appealing or interesting, because I think that's the very nature of the science. Like, there's no way I can make organic chemistry exciting. It's going to be boring. It's going to be, difficult. But the one thing I would offer is that those of us who've studied the ilmi paradigm, or at least I'm still studying, Sheikh Amr has studied
I'm still studying
much more than I have,
no.
But he will agree with me that when you finally get connected to a teacher and you get put in that environment and you're in a curriculum, you're actually much more entertained by doing that quote unquote boring stuff than you are by the so-called more entertaining stuff. Mm-hmm. And every student of knowledge that I've talked to who's been serious about it, that's what they've said, is that it was boring at first, but once I got into it, it was just so awesome that was my entertainment, that the other stuff was less entertaining and less appealing. And and that's the beauty of sacred knowledge, is that once you really fall in love with that paradigm, you got to go through that initial weed out period. But and I felt that same with medicine. I mean, the first year of medical school is probably the most difficult, challenging. You're constantly thinking, man, did I make the right decision? I'm going to drop out. It's okay if my parents disown me, but I just can't do this anymore. But once you actually get involved in it, and you go to your second year, your third year, start taking care of patients, you really fall in love with it, and you realize I had that boring stuff. Now I find a lot more fun. And that's what I see with studying sacred knowledge as well, is that boring stuff becomes fun, but you can't really market it that way. You just have to tell people that they have to taste it. And that's what dhawq is, right? You have to taste it. I mean, I can't tell you what a pineapple tastes like. I can use words, I can, paint a picture or whatever, but unless you've actually tasted a pineapple, like, you're not going to know what a pineapple tastes like. And that's what sacred knowledge is, yeah, we can have these classes and things like that, but until somebody's really immersed himself or herself in that curriculum, that's when you'll really taste it.
Another thing I like to mention, I like that question, is because, the way you put it, you have something that's going to be talking about fiqh of love, respectfully so, and then you have grammar and verbs, right? If you want to say it that way. But there's naturally an audience or a group of people that are going to gravitate towards that because they know that's what they need in order to accomplish the bigger thing, which is understanding versus understanding the Qur'an and how to extrapolate from it, understanding Hadith and how to extrapolate from it. And what that leads to is, believe it or not, people thought I was weird when I was sitting in a dars, which is in a class basically, which had to do with grammar rules of the Qur'an and just grammar, the Matan of Alfiyat ibn Malik, right? Mm-hmm. Which is a 1,000-line poem. Mm-hmm. And when I started really understanding that, and there was a portion of the huruf al-istithna, which is illa, meaning making exceptions, and that's a very rough translation, but I started understanding that and I started liking it, and I never thought, because I never really liked English grammar at all. To be quite frank, I learned English grammar after I learned Arabic grammar. I learned how to read Urdu after I learned how to read Arabic. It's everything happened backwards, and everything happens for a reason. Everything's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the reason I'm mentioning all this is now you start applying those special letters or the particles like illa or fi or whatever the case may be, and you see what role it plays in extrapolating rules from the Qur'an, right? You see what rules it plays from extrapolating from Hadith, for instance. And now you're sitting in a discourse, which happens to be my favorite subject, which is comparative fiqh. And now this comparative fiqh, where you just see how jurists amongst themselves are extrapolating and in a healthy way refuting each other, but also having a beautiful conference of knowledge where it's flourishing. And that starts being your tazkiyat an-nafs. Like, I could never explain to somebody how comparative fiqh of rules and regulations extrapolated from the Qur'an, I feel is raising my iman. Sometimes more so than books that are strictly for tazkiyat an-nafs. But a lot of times someone may not understand it until they've been in that, just understanding how a fiqh ruling gets manifests itself through a verse from the Qur'an, And you have to taste that. And once you taste that, then you start realizing, okay, I have to keep my eyes on the prize, and the way I can achieve that is through learning verbs and conjugation of the verbs, learning grammatical rules. And grammar in Arabic it's a lot more tasteful once you understand it than grammar in English, because now you have something to apply it to, which is the Qur'an. You understand how it plays itself in the Qur'an, right? And the Qur'an starts opening itself to you, and it's no longer just a translation or tafsir you're reading. You know what particle is doing what to the to the verse in the Qur'an, and it starts unraveling itself to you. So that's, if anyone sees that, that's an obstacle for me, I don't want to study Arabic in order to get to that level, just know that there's an amazing light at the end of the tunnel.
I think that's a huge point, because the beauty of the deen is that it is actually entertaining when you really start studying it in the way that it should be studied. I mean, that's why, the Qur'an if you're looking to be happy, there's verses in the Quran that will cheer you up. Read the verses of Jannah and things like that. If you feel like you need to kind of be checked and kind of need to, be brought back down, you read the verses of the fire and the Day of Judgment and things like that. So every single thing that you're looking for, if you want to be entertained, there's stories in the Quran. I mean, the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, I mean, that's better than any movie you'll ever watch. It's got plot twists, it's got betrayal, it's got, deception, all the emotions that you can think about are there in that story. And we see that in Deen as well. Like when you start studying some of the sciences of balagha and adab and poetry and things like that, you see that it's much more entertaining than like a TV show or even people who are like really emo, right? There's people who are emo, right? They want to the whole world is like this and that. I was just reading a line of poetry the other day from Maqamat al-Hariri where, he says, and this is kind of talking about grief and sorrow, and he says, فَلَوْ قَبْلَ مَا بَكَاهَا بَكَيْتُ الصَّبَابَ شَفَيْتُ النَّفْسَ قَبْلَ التَّنَدُّمِ لكن بكت قبلي فهيج قلبي البكاء بكاها فقلت الفضل للمتقدم. And what it translates, it's like this man who is meeting his lover, right? And he's parting from her because he can't be with her. And he said, فَلَوْ قَبْلَ مَا بَكَاهَا. So if only before she cried, I had cried. Right? I would have saved my heart from sorrow, but she cried and she filled my heart with sorrow. And all I could say was that the superiority goes to the one who cried first. Right? I mean, you want emo, or you want something romantic, all those emotions that are there. Just think about the powerful emotions that are there that's entertaining. And this is, two lovers that can't be together that are now, he's saying this thing, and you read things like Layla and Majnun, and so what I'm trying to say is that whatever you're looking for, it's there in the Deen, and it's just a matter of us being humble enough and being open enough to go and pursue it. And initially it's going to be difficult, it's going to be boring, it's going to be like, why the heck am I doing this? But as time goes on, you realize how wonderful and amazing, and it just really is. It's like, and I hate to use this analogy, but it's like the ultimate drug. It's like the ultimate high that you can get. And that's why, the one of the Hanafi scholars said that if the kings of this world knew what we had and studying this Deen, they would have sent their armies to snatch it away from us. And so that's why, kind of going back to what we talked about, that's why I really feel like we all just need to fall in love with ilm and learning and just becoming students once again.
And the other thing that people always used to tell me was, the more you learn, the more humble you're going to become, right? And it was very theoretical, but you really, without a shadow of a doubt, just like you have yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you get this yaqeen. The more you study, you actually enjoy to understand how jahil you actually are. I don't know how it is with many scholars. Well, actually, many scholars will tell you this, but for me, the more I studied, and I'm not sugarcoating in anything in any way, and I'm not the level of sheikh as many people are. It's just I see it as a title that's just given to me because I graduated from something. But you actually realize you actually know nothing the more you learn. And that itself, I think, and this is my own personal theory, or the way I think of it, is human beings, once they fall in love with something, a lot of times that love shows them how lowly they are, and they love that feeling. And I don't know if I'm explaining it properly, if I'm philosophizing this, but to fast forward and let you know what I mean by that is, in the presence of somebody who's actually a sheikh, for instance, let's just talk about Sheikh Amin, because we're already talking about him right now, and you're one of his prominent students. Let's say that in front of Sheikh Amin, somebody calls me sheikh. I'm just telling everybody, any sheikh, no matter who that is, whether they're sheikh on title or, they're going to feel very uncomfortable. And that's happened to me before, because when you're in a caliber, and it happened to me with some scholars in Egypt where somebody was visiting from the States, and they called me sheikh in front of one of my teachers. I felt so uncomfortable. I was like, dude, I don't even want this guy to know that people refer to me as sheikh. That's how it was. I don't want that. And it was very uncomfortable for me. I could feel my ears turning red and heated. That's how it was. And I was like, that didn't just happen. And I couldn't even really have a healthy conversation for the next 15 minutes after that, because I was so perturbed. And that's what knowledge does to you. My personal thing is the human, the rectifying that happens with a human being with knowledge is, they're satisfied with understanding they're nothing, and they actually feed off of that, and they like that. And that's what comparative fiqh does to me. Because sometimes, when you're fiqh al-muqarram, when you're going through comparative fiqh, sometimes you feel that the way that this jurist extrapolated a ruling, you're like, this is it. There's no way this can be beaten, right? And then another scholar comes and he's talking about another opinion, like, whoa, actually, no, this is it, right? And then it just ends up being that, you have to conclude with saying, this can go on till Yawm al-Qiyamah. I know nothing. Just like Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, with his usul, he said that, after 40 times, I was correcting every single time. After the 40th time, al-Risala, I just gave it, for knowledge because I couldn't correct anymore, which he even knows that, this is the most I can do. And al-kamalullah, that's what he said, that perfection is only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if knowledge can do that to you, this world would be an amazing place. That you really are nothing. And you're convinced of that. It's not just something you say for political correctness or whatever. I don't even know what terminology I'm looking for. But it's not for that you really believe that you're nothing.
It's interesting that what you talked about, because like you said, in the religious sciences, we see some of the most amazing and brilliant shuyukh scholars are the people who are the most humble and who said, that they don't know. I mean, Imam Malik's madhab was called the madhab of la adri, like I don't know. In the world of medicine, it's really interesting because it's harder to find these types of people because there's a lot of people that are very arrogant and very full of themselves in the world of medicine. But some of my mentors who I've been fortunate enough to are the exact same way as some of the shuyukh that have had the privilege of knowing, wherein they feel that I know nothing when it comes to medicine, because many times you can read a paper or a study that proves point A, and then you read another paper that kind of disproves point A. And so they feel we know very little about something that we've been, studying and knowing for many years. And they feel humble that we have to keep studying this, keep researching this, trying to learn more and more about it. And, they don't consider themselves to be definitive authorities. And so that's why I've kind of found that there's a lot of similarities between the world of medicine and the world of the religious Muslim sciences, because some of the most the most accomplished and kind of most giant scholars are people that are very comfortable in their skin. They don't go by their titles. They will refer to themselves by their first name. They'll, when Sheikh Amin calls me, he'll, leave me a voicemail and say, Assalamu alaikum Kamran, this is Muhammad Amin, right? He won't even, thing like that. And I see the same thing in the world of medicine. So the doctors who are actually the most comfortable and, they refer to themselves by their first name. They don't give themselves titles on things like that. Even though they have the titles, they don't even wear the white coat, most of them, because they don't want to be like, I'm a doctor. If people know I'm a doctor, they know I'm a doctor. I don't need to wear a white coat. But what's interesting then is that those people who are young often, or who haven't studied fully, or maybe have recently studied, they're the ones that are really going by their titles, sheikh or mufti or this and that. And there's a lot of kind of immaturity that comes that's a result of. And similarly in the world of medicine, I see the exact same thing as people who haven't accomplished much, people who are young, who are trying to make a name for themselves, really go by their titles. They're always kind of, giving themselves importance and, elaborating what their accomplishments and things like that. So humility is a very useful quality, both religiously and secularly. And it's something that I feel that, all of us, could stand to use more of.
I'm usually talking to my boss. He's also my mentor, and we're in IT. I'm not comfortable with our title of system administration. That's what I meant. So don't call me that. You have that same title, and he has 10 years of experience on me, and what he can do, I can't ever hope to catch up to him, realistically at least.
Basically, the best example of this is, Hujjatul Islam, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, right? Yeah. To go back to what we talked about earlier, al-Ghazali at a very young age had pretty much accomplished everything that you could accomplish as a scholar. All of the scholars of Baghdad would come to listen to him. He was the head of the Nizamiya University, which was like the Harvard of his time. There really was nothing left for him to accomplish, at an academic and level on that platform. But yet he then goes through this existential crisis where he doesn't feel fulfilled because he doesn't know why he's doing this. And part of it was he felt that the humility aspect of it, part of it, he felt that it was all just outward. There was no inward. And that's why he kind of goes through this, period of self-imposed exile for 10 years where he, wanders and basically travels the Muslim world and basically works on his inner self. And of course, then he produces his magnum opus of the Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences, which for the first time in Muslim history now is a work that kind of combines and reintroduces what the Sahaba knew, which was the importance of having both the outward knowledge of Islam as well as the inward knowledge and practices of Islam. And that's his great contribution. But that comes from that realization that, yes, even though he knew everything, he realized he knew nothing. And to his credit, that's why he goes on this journey of finding himself. And the result of that, of course, are these 40 wonderful books that basically are all of the sciences of Islam combined into a 40-volume book. So that's kind of a great example of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, Ghazali is such an inspiration in just terms of, I try to train myself to always be self-reflective and being more introspective of how or who I am and what makes me tick. Just reading his books, I feel amazed at how much effort and how much introspection he did throughout his life.
And I think, why he's very important for Muslims of our time to kind of pay attention to once again is that the same problems that were happening in his day are the same problems that are happening internally among the Ummah, among our day as well. I mean, when he was alive, 1058 to 1111, there was attacks on the Muslim world. Like, the Mongols were there. There's all sorts of fitan and chaos and tribulations that were going on. But yet he saw that the greatest crisis of his time was that the Ummah was either shifting towards only the outward practice of Islam, so only knowing the fiqh and the outward practices, or there was another segment of the Ummah that was only about, I need to work on my spirituality, I need to be a good person, what I'm referring to.
Right.
And what we find in our community is basically that same thing, where there's either an overemphasis on, you have to, know the fiqh, and you have to know this, and this is halal, and this is haram, and is this vertical cut, is this, horizontal cut? I mean, that's the discussion on one end. And on the other end, it's kind of like, it doesn't matter if I don't pray, as long as I feel God in my heart, I'm a good person.
I'm spiritual.
Yeah, I'm spiritual, right? And that's kind of what was happening in Ghazali's time, was that you had this whole group of people who had taken, unfortunately, tasawwuf to that level where now no longer was the fard ayn, the obligatory actions being done, but these, the extra credit or the supererogatory actions were so emphasized that the basics were forgotten. Yeah. And that's what we see happening in our community right now, is that there's a lot of people on either side, over here on the right or over here on the left, not to use a political analogy, but what we need is sort of that same revival here to tell people, Muslims in particular, that look, we have to follow the outward law. Like, there's no getting around that. But
they have to be discussed. Yeah,
it has to be discussed. But at the same time, we also need to talk about the inward sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ, rahmah, mercy, compassion, tolerance, and things like that. But neither of them should preclude the other. And that's what the genius of the Ihya, and Sheikh Amr can speak about this much more probably, is that's the format that it goes to. Like, you pick up a book like Kitab al-Salah, it'll talk about the outward dimensions of prayer at the beginning part of it, and then it'll go through the inward dimensions as the second part of it, and the third part is how do you bring those two together. And that's how he basically approaches every single subject. And I think that's what we need as American Muslims, is to study the subjects and know the outward and the fiqh of the subject. That is important, and that's the starting point. And then we also have to know the inward and the mindset, the behavior. How did the Prophet ﷺ and the companions do this, and what was their behavior, not just their actions? And then synthesize that into something that is truly prophetic and that is truly in the footsteps of the companions, radiyallahu anhum.
And one of the things that amplify what you just said to a certain to the audience, just to understand that in Hadith Jibreel, obviously all hadith are phenomenal, but this hadith covers all topics of what we call Sharia, right? And the final portion, which scholars of Tazkiyah will refer to as when Jibreel alayhi salam asked Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ihsan? What's ihsan? Right? And he says, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ, that you worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you don't see Him, know that He sees you. What this does is this works on the outwardly and the inwardly at the same time. Because if you are convinced of your Creator the way you're supposed to be convinced, and you have taqwa in Him, the way you're supposed to have taqwa in Him, then your prayer outwardly is going to be the best you can, and internally, because Allah is watching you, you're going to be all there the way Allah wants you to be there. Which is why this hadith is such, this basically elevated this whole entire subject of the inner self, right? Al-ihsan. And what is ihsan? That you worship Allah as if He sees you. Because if you worship Allah as if He sees you, your outwardly is going to be in a certain way. You're going to make sure you're doing everything properly, sticking to the rules, if you want to say. And inwardly, how can you not be involved with your Creator at this time when He's watching you?
Yeah.
Right?
Imagine everything that would change.
Exactly.
If they had that belief, if everyone
Exactly.
had it.
And one hadith takes care of that, right? The inwardly and the outwardly at the same time, right? And I think that's an amazing example for me, which was given to me when I was younger, and it always stuck to me, right? Is that one portion of the hadith which started and made this subject flourish is actually keeps your internal and external, inward and outward in good health,
Kamran, what have you been able to, what are you feeling that I need to contribute to society, our Muslim community, most from what you have learned at Darul Qasim or even through earlier studies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I feel on one hand, I hope that people can look at me, young people, and can realize that they can do secular and religious studies. And I want them to do much more than I have done. I feel like I've done very little. And I'm very refreshed. I see a lot of young people come and talk to me, and they ask me, how can I do both? And I give them advice. I point them in the right direction. And I'm hopeful that we'll see more and more of that. So if I can kind of be a mentor figure for people, I feel like that's something I'm very, passionate about, because I don't consider myself to be like the role model here, but I want people to be better and to accomplish much more, both secularly and religiously, than whatever small things I have. But number two, I feel like my passion is to be somebody who can kind of communicate with the ulama and collaborate with them on issues in my field, such as medicine, and help them understand what does modern medicine say about things, so that we can synthesize and collaborate on issues that will be much more meaningful when you have both voices, that are present. So these are the types of things that I'm interested in. And then number three, I think, as I've talked about, I just want people, the American Muslim community, to realize that now more than ever is when we need people to fall in love with learning, because a lot of the crises that we see, on one hand, we have the extremists, the ISIS types and stuff like that. And that comes about when you're divorced from a scholarly tradition. I mean, none of the interpretations of the extremist groups that are out there, which are basically social political agendas that are couched in religious language, none of these are compatible with the way that the Ummah historically has understood the Qur'an and the Sunnah, right? So this is why, as Abu Hanifa said, يُفْهَمُ الْقُرْآنُ كَمَا فَهِمَتْهُ الْأُمَّةِ, that the Qur'an has to be understood in the way that the Ummah has understood it. So you can't look at, some of the verses of qital and fighting and interpret them now in a certain bastardized way. And that's not a swear word, guys, by the way. You can look it up. Which is incompatible with anything with the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Tabi'een would have ever agreed to. I mean, they would have been mortified, because the people who interpreted the way that ISIS and these types are interpreted, they were called the Khawarij, right? They were the Kharijites.
I would actually show Sheikh Amr some of the discussions I've had with some of their supporters online trying to refute them. And they would take such rare instances in Islamic history and try to pass it off as dalil.
Yeah.
There is no real way that a regular person in a meaningful conversation can be able to convince someone that is not a valid way of understanding Islam.
Yeah.
You have to have a society who is building an educational framework within our community, so that we as Muslims can learn Islam together in a correct institutional manner, I guess.
Well, I mean, that's why, what makes us Muslims different from people of the book, right? Ahlul Kitab, is that our understanding of the book was never the written word, right? Alladhina yattabi'una ar-rasul an-nabiy al-ummi, right? Those who followed the unlettered Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for us, the oral tradition, or how we understood the written word, was more important than the written word itself. That's why the miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, of the Qur'an, for example, was that it was never written down and compiled during the Prophet ﷺ's lifetime, right? It was the oral understanding, the organic breathing tradition of how do we understand the Quran was what was preserved by the Sahaba. And that's why Ibn Sirin said that, inna hadha amra deen, right? فَانظُرُوا عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُوا دِينَكُمْ, that this affair is deen itself, meaning learning knowledge, and the isnad. So look to whom you take this deen from. And so the ISIS types, they have no scholarly connection to anything that would be considered normative Islam or part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And that's very important for Muslims to understand, because this is how we fight that, is we make people realize that you can't study Islam on your own. You can't read a translated copy of Bukhari and take a one-off hadith in Muslim or Bukhari and say that this is what Islam should be, because there's an organic oral tradition that this is how Muslims have understood Islam. And that's very important. And then on the other hand, we have sort of the liberal, progressive, perennialist types, where now it's like everything should be reinterpreted. Oh, does the word hijab, does it really mean hijab, or does it mean something else? Or, and these completely other end of the spectrum of how to look at things, when the Muslims have always understood something like hijab, or something like, who should be the Imam of the Salah. This is how we've always understood it.
And you were mentioning about the Inna Dina Inda Allah al-Islam, and how the perennials look at it. Can you shed a little bit of light just along the same topic?
Yeah, I mean, so of course, we have the study Qur'an, which came out, and I think it's a wonderful work. I think the intention of the people behind it was very good. These are wonderful people. They're probably much more pious than I am, and I'm not castigating or criticizing the people themselves. But there are some very problematic things in there. For example, the verse, Inna Dina Inda Allah al-Islam, the 19th verse of Surah Al-Imran, where verily the religion with Allah is Islam, there's a lot of linguistic gymnastics that are done. And they use the concept of the capital I Islam to refer to the religion of Islam, and a lowercase I Islam to refer to surrendering or submitting to God in general, and saying that Islam with a capital I is part of Islam with a lowercase I, and therefore any religion wherein someone submits to God is eligible for salvation. Now that may be true once we get there on the day of Yawm al-Qiyamah. If Allah chooses to save people, hey, if Allah chooses to save people, that's not my concern. Like, I'm just worried about what's going to happen to me, right? That's what the Day of Judgment is, the day when a man will flee from his family, his wife, his children, etc., etc. But our aqidah requires that for us to understand that when we say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, then the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's the only thing that leads to salvation that we know of. Will other deens lead to salvation? That's for Allah to decide, but I can't say that all those other deens will lead to salvation, because that would then undermine what my messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam has brought. So it's really important that we also learn so to prevent that from happening as well, where this idea now we need to kind of reform Islam. Islam has to go through this reformation just like Christianity went through in order to kind of bring it into the modern times, is, in my opinion, basically the two sides of the same coin, right? You have the ISIS types on one side, and you have the liberal progressive types on the other side, where both of them are divorced from a scholarly tradition. Both of those understandings are not compatible with Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, what the main body of the Muslims have understood. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ told his companion, Talzim Jama'at al-Muslimin, that hold to the body of the Muslims, or the main Jama'ah, because that's what's not going to go astray. So when we have people now that are calling for mixed gender prayer and things like that, and saying that, oh, why can't we do this? Then our response should be, well, look, it's a free country, right? You can do what you want to do, but don't call it Islam, exactly. Right? Don't call it the deen of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's where I feel why learning is so important, because when you learn, it basically that is the best vaccination against both of these two, what I would call diseases.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's what I kind of go back to, is that's what the American Muslim community needs to do, is we need to learn so that we don't fall into the ideology and the thinking methodology of ISIS, and we don't fall into the thinking ways of some of the liberals who are just wanting to change the deen into something that is now only just called Islam, but won't have any of the elements that are recognizable of Islam. So
yeah, what you just did was summarize what the Mad Mamluks mission statement is.
I was going to say that too.
You just summarized us. This is what we were kind of founded on. Like, we have to cut out the extremes on both sides, and we got to come to an agreement that the main body of Muslims have to realize that there is an imminent danger from extremes of every part of society who are looking to tear you apart. It's not just ISIS, in every facet of society who are trying to claim Islam for their own, and we as a moderate, regular Muslims have to take it back.
Yeah, and you brought up something really awesome too, is when some of these, like for instance, like Trump, right? Let's just say it. Whatever he's saying about Muslims are starting to understand that, hey, my deen and myself are in jeopardy. Forget about all these little petty things. And I have to come back to the main group of believers, right? And we have to do something together, to redirect this whole negative energy, basically. Yeah. And a lot of times instances do that. Events and individuals, personalities that are filled with hate, they bring the Muslims back together because it makes them understand, hey, these are just petty things, that we were dealing with, and that happens when you're in a very frightened state. You're only thinking about the fright. Sometimes you start pondering, why was I even thinking about these little petty things or made that my priority? Right. And I think priorities are the main thing. Yeah, but go ahead. I kind of cut you off.
No, I was going to say that, sometimes Allah brings about good things through evil people. And, in what I think the good thing about Trump and the Islamophobes that are out there, that what's happening is it's forcing now Muslims to make a choice.
Yes.
Which is worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be good civic citizens, do what we can to get out the awareness about what Islam is about and try to combat Islamophobia. But this idea now where a lot of Muslims were trying to kind of separate themselves from deen in the hopes of gaining entrance into white America, that myth and that fantasy should be ended now, right? Because that's one thing I've learned from the past 8 years of the Obama presidency is you have a black man in the White House, but how's that worked out for black people? Right? You still have Black Lives Matter. The water crisis in Flint, you think that would happen if that was Bloomington Hills, Michigan, right? Or Oak Brook, Illinois? That's not going to happen there, right? So there's certainly a double standard that's there. And so Muslims should realize that, look, we don't need to do anything drastic, but the idea that I can assimilate and just kind of become part of everybody and nobody's going to notice me, that dream is ended. That, if I sacrifice some of the ideals of my religion, it's okay if I go and drink with my coworkers in order to get ahead. I don't want to pray at work because it's going to kind of make me feel embarrassed. Or that's what I meant by trying to, become. There's
an aspect that helps you understand that bigger point that you're talking about, right?
And I don't, because it's important that, accomplishing things professionally, financially, there's no need to ever apologize for that.
Yes.
But what I was trying to say is that we shouldn't sacrifice our religious and ethnic ideals,
of course,
in order to get there. And I think what was happening in the minds of many Muslims, especially people our age, was they felt that it was almost very Machiavellian in the sense that whatever I need to do to get there, it's going to be okay because once I get there, then I'll be safe and then I'll think about helping Islam or becoming Muslim at that time. And we're realizing that that formula is not going to work. We might as well embrace who we are right now, go out, worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, take care of your family, be a good social citizen, good person at work, good student, make da'wah through your actions primarily, and realize that, look, even if we go through difficult times, even if Trump puts us in concentration camps and things like that, hey, we'll have the best healthcare and the best internet, right? Because we'll have doctors and IT professionals. They'll be better than Comcast internet, right?
I like it.
But, najat, or salvation, is still on the table. And that's ultimately what we're really fighting for. Yes, it's nice to change society. It's nice to make things better and social justice and all that. That's wonderful. And Rasulullah Sallallaahu Alaihi Wasallam did do that, and we should be involved with that. But we shouldn't become depressed or so distracted that we forget that our job here in this dunya is to make ourselves eligible for success over there. And that's, alhamdulillah, that hasn't been taken off the table by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We still can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same way that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam worshipped Allah. We can still pray the same way. We can read the Qur'an the same way. We can fast in the same way. We can stay away from the haram things in the same way. That thankfully hasn't been taken away from us, because then that to me is one of the signs that Allah's fadl, Allah's grace is still on this ummah, that salvation, we are still eligible for it, inshallah. And so despite how crazy and how chaotic things become in the future, and again, we ask for Allah's afiyah, his comfort and protection, But even if it does become chaotic, because here's the other unspoken thing that many of us realize, but many people don't say, is that when you read the ahadith about the end times, we realize that things are going to get worse. The Prophet ﷺ said they are going to get worse, right? So eventually, whether it happens tomorrow, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, Allahu A'lam, but things are going to progressively get worse and worse and worse. Right? And وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ, he doesn't speak from whims and caprices. So Muslims can either be depressed that, oh, things are getting bad, and oh my goodness, what's happening? Like, what's happening? Or we can be like, wow, my Prophet Sallallaahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't make a mistake. He didn't tell a lie in the sense that this was going to happen. He said this is going to, holding on to Islam is going to be like holding on to the burning coal, and, طُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَاء, glad tidings to the strangers. So all I have to do now is just try to do the absolute bare minimum of what my deen has asked me to do, be a good, person to my family, be a good person to my community, and inshallah, I'm still eligible for najat. And that, I think, is the most comforting, most antidepressant thing that Muslims should hold on to and should remind themselves every day when they wake up and every day that they go to bed at night is, alhamdulillah, najat, salvation, is still on the table, hasn't been taken away.
And that rebirth of Islam will actually carry the Muslims through the worst times that Rasulullah ﷺ spoke of, that will happen towards the end of times. That when you read about those times, you shudder to think, like, I hope I'm not alive at those times, because it will take very strong iman to carry yourself through those times.
I want to end on that note, actually. Dr. Kamran Riaz, Jazakallah khair for coming. Learned a lot, actually. And there's so much to talk about. There's so much to talk about, but just given time, we couldn't talk about all that.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure and an honor to sit with you guys. And
actually, it was, I don't know about you guys, it's very rejuvenating for me. The conversation that we had is actually very uplifting. So you actually did us a very huge favor.
Jazakallah khair. Thanks for having me. The donuts were very good too.
So. That's all Moga, man. Moga, he explored that place.
Food is on its
with that, I want to end this podcast. By the way, if anyone wants to get in touch with either you or Darul Qasim.
Yeah, Darul Qasim's website is www.darulqasim.org. Search me on Twitter, Facebook, Kamran Riaz, Kamran. Last name is Riaz, Riaz, if people wish to follow me or get in touch with me. But those are ways to kind of learn more about some of the work that I'm involved with.
Okay, we'll also have that in the description. For anyone interested in the story that wants to share their own story, please send us an email at themadmamluks@gmail.com, themadmamluks@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page and a Twitter handle, also at themadmamluks. Jazakallah khair for listening. Assalamu alaikum.